There is a truth about ungrateful children that nobody says out loud. Not the therapists, not your closest friends, not the books you read at night hoping to find an answer somewhere between the lines. And I have been sitting with this truth long enough now that staying quiet about it feels like its own kind of dishonesty. The distance your children keep from you is not an accident. It is not a character flaw that appeared out of nowhere one afternoon. It is the result of something that built itself slowly, over years, quietly, invisibly, layer upon layer. And the people who find the courage to actually look at it, they are the ones who finally begin to understand what happened. You are here because the explanations you have been giving yourself have stopped being enough. Because the distance your children keep is not something you can simply accept. And yet you accept it every single day. And that pain, that particular specific pain, has no name that anyone has ever handed you. I am not saying this to unsettle you. I am saying it because it is the first honest thing, and everything else depends on it. I am 85 years old. I raised 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. And for a long time I told myself the story that most mothers tell themselves, that they were busy, that this was just how modern life was, that the distance was temporary, that it would soften with time. I believe that story the way you believe something you have repeated so many times, it starts to feel like fact. And then, at some point, I stopped being able to believe it. The story ran out, and what was left underneath it was something I had to look at without flinching. That is what I want to talk about today. It does not begin where you think it begins. It does not begin when they grew up and pulled away. It began much earlier, in a place you could not see, because you were too busy loving. Now I want to say something that may feel uncomfortable. I am asking you to stay with it anyway. There is a particular way that mothers love, a love that sacrifices without being asked, that wakes in the night, that gives things up quietly and says nothing about it. That love is real. It matters. It deserves to be recognized. But sometimes that love carries something hidden inside it. Nobody chooses this deliberately. No one teaches it. It simply happens. A mother who gave up things she never named, who stayed up worrying, who carried the weight of a household for decades without anyone fully seeing it. Somewhere inside herself she keeps a record, not a written one, not a conscious one, but it is there. The way certain things are present in a room without anyone saying them. After everything I have done for you, how many times did I think that, or say it, or let it sit in the silence after a phone call that ended too quickly? I believed I was being honest. I was. But there is a kind of honesty that builds walls without intending to. Every time a child grows up sensing that the love they received came with an invisible weight, they do not move toward you with more gratitude. They move away carrying something they cannot put down. I think about Anne, my oldest. She loves me. I know she does. But she cannot be in the same house with me for more than 2 days before something in her tightens. I used to tell myself she was the complicated one, that she had always been that way. Now I understand something different. She learned very early, without anyone teaching her in words, that closeness came with a cost. That my love, as real and as large as it was, arrived with a quiet invoice attached. And she has spent 30 years trying, without quite knowing it, to avoid the bill. That is a hard thing to understand about your own child. It is harder still to understand it about yourself. But there is a second layer, and this one brought me something closer to relief. The lives your children are living look completely different from the inside than they appear from where you stand. The pressure they carry is a kind that did not exist in the same way when I was raising mine. Susan works more hours than her father ever did, comes home to a house that still needs running, children who still need mothering, a marriage that still needs attention. And somewhere in all of that, she is supposed to also be present. For me, for everyone. I used to feel the gap in her attention as something personal. I would hang up the phone carrying that particular ache, the feeling of having spoken to someone who was already somewhere else. For years I made that about me, and it was not about me, or not only. When Michael goes weeks without calling, the thought that comes first is not, he is probably drowning right now. The thought that comes first is, he does not want to talk to me. That is a human response. I understand it. But that thought, repeated enough times, becomes the official story. And once it is the official story, you begin to act from inside it. You pull back or you push harder. Either way, the distance grows. I have had 3 years of quiet to think about this. 3 years since Harold died and the house became something I moved through alone. 3 years of noticing what was really there, underneath all the explanations I had stacked up over the decades. And what I came to believe is this. Most of what I felt as rejection was not rejection. It was exhaustion meeting distance. Two people on different sides of a life trying to stay connected across a gap that nobody designed and nobody chose. That does not make the ache disappear, but it changes what the ache means. And meaning, I have learned, matters more than almost anything. Now I want to tell you the part I was most reluctant to see, because this one is not about them. It is about me. And it is the layer that once I finally sat with it honestly, rearranged everything else. Somewhere in the middle of raising them, I lost track of myself. I do not mean I regret any of it. I want to be clear about that. But there is a woman who existed before any of them arrived, a woman with her own way of being in the world, her own small pleasures, her own ideas about what a day could hold. And that woman did not disappear in a single moment. She disappeared in increments, in small decisions that felt entirely natural at the time, in sacrifices that seemed too minor to mention. And one day, being a mother was not something I did alongside everything else. It was the only thing left of me. I used to paint, nothing important, watercolors mostly, the back garden, the light on the kitchen window in the mornings. I had a small corner of the table I kept for it, and Sunday mornings before anyone else was awake were mine. When the children were young, I stopped, because there simply was no time, and I told myself I would return to it. I never did. Not because anyone stopped me, because somewhere along the way I had stopped thinking of myself as someone who did that. The corner of the table became something else, and I became someone else, and neither of us noticed it happening. Have you ever lost something that slowly? Something so gradual you could not point to the moment it was gone? Here is what I came to understand, and it is the thing I most wish someone had said to me 20 years ago. A woman who has folded herself entirely into being needed, whose sense of existing depends on being at the center of her children's lives, that woman, without meaning to, places a weight on her children that love alone cannot lift. They sense that she needs them in order to feel real, and people who sense that kind of need do not move toward it with more warmth. They retreat from it with a discomfort they may not even be able to name. I was not a burden to my children because I was difficult. I was a weight they carried because I had stopped carrying myself. That is not a comfortable thing to say. I am 85 years old, and it still costs me something to say it plainly. But I think the truth has more dignity than the comfortable version. And I think you are here because you already suspect that the comfortable version is not the whole story. So here are the 3 things I had to see, together in the same light. The love I gave that carried a hidden ledger. The lives my children were living that I could not fully see from the outside. And the woman I had let disappear without noticing, who then needed her children to replace everything she had lost. None of those 3 things makes me a bad mother. None of them makes my children ungrateful in the simple, dismissive way that word usually gets used. What they make is a picture, a human, complicated, painful picture of how good love and real loss can produce a distance nobody wanted and nobody quite knows how to close. The ungratitude, when I finally looked at it honestly, was not coldness. It was the echo of a system none of us had chosen, and none of us had been able to see while we were living inside it. I say that without excusing anyone, including myself. But I say it with the respect that belongs to someone who loved for decades, with everything she had, without ever being taught to look at what that love was also doing. The looking begins now, late, but not too late. I believe that. Here is where I want to be careful with you, because I think there is a version of everything I just said that becomes another way to punish yourself. And that is not what I am offering. Seeing clearly is not the same as convicting yourself. It is, I think, the opposite. What I had to understand was that I contributed to this distance, not from cruelty, not from selfishness, but from being human, from loving in the way I had been taught to love, from a life in which certain things were never given to me either, and I could not pass on what I had never received. To acknowledge that is not self-punishment. It is the only place from which something can actually shift. Because what you cannot see, you cannot change. And you have more power than you think. Even now. But here is the question that I had to stop avoiding, the one that matters more than how to fix things with your children. What do you do with the days you have left for yourself, regardless of what they choose? I am not asking you to give up on closeness with your children. I am not saying the distance is permanent or that nothing can change between you. What I am saying is that a life spent waiting for their return before it truly begins is a life that quietly shrinks, and one day you look up and the rooms feel very small. Last spring, I put a small table in the corner of the kitchen. I bought a set of watercolors, the cheap kind, the kind meant for children, because I did not want to make it into a significant thing. I just wanted to paint the garden the way I used to. The first morning I sat there, I cried. Not from sadness exactly, from something harder to name, from the feeling of walking back into a room in yourself you had forgotten was there, and finding the light still worked. That is not a story about painting. It is a story about the difference between a woman who is waiting and a woman who is living. And the children, when they visit now, I think they feel something different. I am not certain, but I think they do. Because I am not waiting for them to make me real anymore. I am already here. You cannot make them call more often. You cannot close the distance by wanting it badly enough. But you can stop organizing your sense of yourself around whether they do. You can find, even now, even at this age, the corner of the table that belongs to you. I know that sounds smaller than what you came here hoping to hear. You came hoping for something that would bring them back. I understand that. I wanted that too. But what I found in 3 years of sitting with the honest version of this story is that the way back to each other, if there is one, does not begin with them. It begins with you remembering who you were before you needed them to tell you. That woman is still there. I am quite certain of it. She has been quiet for a long time, but she is there. And if something I said today sits with you, a feeling you recognized, something you have never quite put into words, I would be glad to hear it. Leave a thought below if you feel moved to. Not because I have answers, but because naming something, even in a small comment, is sometimes the first step toward understanding it. And I do not think any of us should have to carry this alone. You do not need them to come back in order to go forward. That took me a long time to believe, but I believe it now.